remember where we were, that's a pretty good memory right there. Susie said, oh, how far along were we? Weren't we over there to about the Kings or the Chronicles, somewhere there? I said, no, Susie, we weren't near that far. I said, we were still in the Patriarchs when we left off. And she said, oh, my lands, we're not going to finish that Old Testament before we get a pastor and are gone from here. But I'll bet you we do in some form or fashion. We may be condensing a lot of it toward the latter part, but we'll certainly give some kind of a chronology of the Old Testament. How many more copies we need? Half a dozen? Who needs a copy? Let me see your hand here. Are we okay? Okay, I believe we are. Steve, thank you. All right, yes, you bet you. As we begin our study, and I would remind you now that we've got several different types of literature, genre we call them, in the Scriptures, in the Old Testament more specifically. What's one type of genre? What's one type of literature that we have in the Old Testament? Poetry, absolutely. We've got poetry with Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, 5 books of poetry. What else do we have? What other type of genre? History would certainly be a section of the Old Testament, but a great deal of history would be in what kind of form? Prose or narrative is what I was looking for there. So in addition to poetry, we also have narrative, and there's some apocalyptic literature, in the Old Testament. We certainly find some things in Daniel and Ezekiel and really other places, but there's some apocryphal literature. What do we have when we move through Genesis and Exodus? We're talking narrative literature, so we're primarily talking here in a story form kind of thing. It's pretty interesting what has even happened in the last 10 to 20 years as far as people that are experts in the area of teaching and trying to speak about how we can most effectively communicate and transfer information to the various cultures and groups throughout the world. And we're certainly finding as evangelicals that one of the most effective ways in which we can teach those that have been born again and that God has called to leadership in their particular culture. You think about Africa would certainly be a classic example, that a great deal of what's being done now is story form. There's a lot of teaching, and for people who hardly know anything at all, we've found that we can go there and teach those pastors that God has called out into the bush country of Africa, and while they go back to perhaps a group of people that do not yet have the Scripture even in their language, but whether they do or not, to be able to share it in narrative form, in story form, is found to be a wonderful way to get the gospel and the truth of God across. That's only one way, but doesn't surprise any of us to hear someone say to simply tell the story of the Bible. It has been effective in whatever generation that we've lived in. But that's where we are when we come to the book of Genesis. In the first 12 chapters, we certainly did see, as we looked at creation and the fall of man, as we took into consideration what happened in those first 12 chapters right on through the Tower of Babel. And we come to the 12th chapter and we find Abraham. And it's from Abraham on through the rest of the book of Genesis that we find the 4 patriarchs of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, those 4 patriarchs. And we had covered 3 of them when we finished up before COVID hit. of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so we made our way down to the 37th chapter and to the story of Joseph, and that's where we kind of left off. Are y'all following with me there on your outline? Or some of you know this type of thing backwards and forward. And I have told you before that I don't feel any need to apologize to you who know the Bible really quite well, and this is kind of old hat to you, because what we're doing in chronologically trying to march our way through the Old Testament is to be able to share it in a way that a person that has not had your background and your experience can be able to understand and kind of put it together. Many folks have heard these stories, but they've never heard them chronologically shared. They've never heard them talked about, you might say, from Genesis through Malachi. And so that's our attempt to do just exactly that. So we come tonight to the marvelous story of this man named Joseph. Any question or comment up till this point? All right, let's jump into it here then. We're talking about the 37th chapter of Genesis there. So if you have your Bible and you haven't opened it up, well, please do to that 37th chapter, and I think you'll be able to follow right along with your little outline there, which is absolutely bare bones stuff. And with your Bible open, you'll certainly be able to follow along as I basically tell you the story of what is here in chapters 37 through 50. For we are able to finish up the four patriarchs, Joseph, the story of Joseph and his family will be what we will be talking about from chapters 37 through 50. There perhaps is no more admirable or attractive man in the Old Testament than the man Joseph. I realize that would certainly be debatable, but he did possess so many desirable qualities. I mean, you think about his generosity and the high ideals that he lived by, unselfishness and a forgiving spirit. My goodness, how he exampled that. Clean living, really, in an atmosphere that certainly was tempting and opportune for him to live otherwise. One is inspired, I think, by even a casual look at Joseph's life. And from the standpoint of literature alone, the story of Joseph, I think, ranks right up there as one of the greatest narratives ever written. This classic story never ceases, I think, to be a favorite among many people, especially young people seem to remember the story of Joseph so well. So let's take a look at it tonight in the time that we have left. His early life is told about there in verses 5 through 17 of this 37th chapter. He was the firstborn son, if you remember, of Jacob and Rachel. Rachel was something really special to Jacob, wasn't she? I mean, she's the one, you remember, that he worked for 7 years to have the privilege to marry her. Old Uncle Laban did a job on Jacob, didn't he? He had to end up working 7 more years, but he did indeed, having married her older and uglier sister, apparently, Leah. He marries his true love in Rachel. And Jacob had children by Leah, by handmaids, by concubines. He had not had a child by Rachel. And so when Joseph was born, he was something very special to Jacob. She's going to bear 2 children, if you remember. Rachel is, or 2 boys. One was Joseph, and the other was who? Benjamin, that's right, Benjamin. If you remember, Benjamin was the baby of the 12 sons of Jacob. Benjamin was the baby. So we're talking about Joseph and Benjamin. Many times it would be pretty easy for a parent to maybe show a little favoritism toward the baby, but that was not the case here, was it? As a matter of fact, there's every evidence that Papa Jacob, considered Joseph to be his favorite son. Now, why was that, you think? Why do you think Joseph might have been? It's kind of a guess, so what's your guess as to why he was the favorite, if that was true? Rachel's firstborn, that certainly probably the most important reason. You think of anything else? I wonder if perhaps his gentle disposition, there's reason to think, you have to read between the lines a little bit, but I get the strong impression that this is just one sweet boy as a little guy, growing up. I think he would have been easy to love. And especially when you contrasted him to his frazzling brothers. I mean, those guys, as best I can tell, that was a rough and tumble group, the older brothers. They were, I think, probably oftentimes in trouble was the impression that I get. If what I'm saying is true, and I'm kind of out on a limb talking like that, then I can see where Jacob would have certainly looked with favor upon this fine young kid as he grows up with those old rough brothers that he had. But what happened as time went along there? His father, because he was a favorite, did something for him. What did he do? Jacob, toward Joseph when he was young. He gave him what? Yeah, he did. He gave him a bright and beautiful coat. We call it the coat of many colors, and the Bible doesn't call it the coat of many colors, but we think that it certainly was a beautiful coat, and it turned out to be a real problem, didn't it? As far as those brothers were concerned, they were jealous. I feel sure they were jealous. They could see the favoritism there that Jacob was given toward Joseph, and it absolutely ticked them off. They were not happy about this, and as though that was not enough, Joseph has a couple of dreams. And he hadn't got any more sense than to tell his brothers about these dreams. You remember? He just came right out and told them what he thought, and that your sheaves were bowing down toward my sheaves. What are you saying, boy? Are you saying that we're going to bow down toward you? That you're going to be you're going to be superior over us? Is that what you're saying? Well, he had one dream, and if that wasn't enough to get him in trouble, he had a second dream, and more of the same. And so you talk about angry and jealous, even I think to the point where they were ready to do him some harm. They were ready to show some violence toward this kid. He was way over the line as far as they were concerned. So we get down to verse 18 and go down through verse 36 there, and we see the story of where he does end up being sold into slavery. You remember how that happened? These were nomadic people with their herds, of course. Jacob sent those young men out to take care of the herds, and many times they had to travel way on out yonder to be able to get the job done, to find pasture that would be sufficient for those flocks. And so they would begin there in this particular story in that season that's in the south around Hebron, and work their way up northward. And after having been absent from the home for several weeks, their papa, Jacob, got I'm sure, anxious to get some news from them. And so he ends up sending Joseph, although he wasn't all that old. He still sent him out. Of course, he was decked out in that handsome coat, and he went out to try to get a report from his brothers. He travels north some miles, and he finally overtakes them at Dothan, near Shechem. And they saw him coming at a distance. And in the midst of their jealousy and anger, I think they saw this as this is our opportunity. And they decided, I think this was the first time perhaps, that they decided that they were going to kill him. Reuben, you remember, was the oldest of these 12 boys, and he dissuaded them from such a notion, but the Bible would tell us that Reuben had an errand to run, or he had a task to do that took him away from the brothers and from Joseph there for a while. And while he was gone, those brothers decided what? Yeah, we're going, don't have to kill him. We got a better deal. Not only will we get rid of him, but we'll pick up a little money on this deal. And caravans, they were at a place where I understand they traveled often through here, and so a caravan that was heading down toward Egypt, and they had thrown him in a pit, and they drug him out of that pit. Reuben, I really believe, intended to come back and to pull Joseph out of the pit and send him home. That's, for what that's worth, and probably not worth much, but think about that. We do know that it happened while Reuben was gone, and they sold him for 20 pieces of silver, or whatever the scripture says there, to this caravan heading down toward Egypt, sold him into slavery. Would you have any comment or any question when we talk like that? Well, it was bad enough that they would sell him into slavery. But my lands, what did they do to come up with a story to tell their papa? They had that coat, didn't they? They had that beautiful coat, and so they tore that thing into shreds and dipped it in goat's blood and carried it back home and said to Jacob, "Look what we found." And of course, Jacob recognized the coat, and he concluded, "Oh, my soul, my son Joseph's been killed by a horrible animal." And he goes into mourning. It's pretty hard to overstate, I think, how deeply grieved Jacob would have been on this occasion. And you've just got to keep in mind that his own sons did him this way. It's bad enough to do in Joseph, their kid brother there, but to do their father that way gives us some insight, I think. And these guys were, well, in my generation, we'd call them jerks, They were just a bunch of jerks, weren't they? Good night. Why would you do your father that way? And it broke his heart, absolutely broke his heart. It's suggested that it was about 13 years that passed by from the time that he was sold into slavery, from the time that his father thought that he was dead, until that time in which they will be reunited. So here's this old man who for 13 years thought that he had lost his favorite son, lost the firstborn of Rachel. You remember Rachel died they buried her on the way from Jerusalem down toward Bethlehem as it is today. In fact, if you're traveling in the Holy Land, that Rachel's grave is marked, and you can visit. Yeah, it's still there. If you remember, most of those patriarchs, Abraham and forward, are buried there at Mamre. We'll talk about that here if we get to it tonight. And Jacob wanted to be buried there as well, but he had buried his wife Rachel, and now he'd lost her firstborn son. Okay, well, we come on down here then to the 39th and the 40th chapters, and Susie's pretty good to wave me down, but y'all keep me posted here, and we'll shut it down at 7:30. Yeah, we get down to the 39th and the 40th chapter. When Joseph reached Egypt down there, he was sold as a slave to whom? To whom was he sold? Potiphar, yeah, to Potiphar, who was an officer of the Pharaoh. Potiphar was an officer of the Pharaoh, and that's where Joseph got sold as a slave. We just have several opportunities to hear where this young man seems to take on an attitude and an acceptance of his situation in whatsoever state there I'm in, therewith to be content kind of a thing. He takes on, and here he does. He's sold into Egyptian slavery, and he accepts the fact that is what has happened to him, and he behaves himself wisely. And it's not apparently that long before he has been in such high favor with his master that he's placed into the highest position in the household of Potiphar there. And then came Joseph's great temptation, if you remember. Potiphar's wife was not exactly a winner, was she? Hardly. She becomes infatuated with Joseph. Another reason for us, I think, for at least me, I have to believe this is probably one handsome dude. This is a good-looking young man. I've got reason to think, in a lot of ways that he was attractive. One of the ways, perhaps, in which we're able to see his leadership be as effective as it was is because he's such a good-looking guy, such an outstanding fellow. But mostly that character shows itself again and again. Well, she becomes infatuated with him and uses every means that she can to induce him to commit adultery with her. And in his refusal, of course, Joseph exhibits a great deal of strength of character. He said, how then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? He said. Boy, you talk about taking the high road. You can certainly see it right here when he would make a comment like that to her. Well, how did she react to that when she got rejected, you might say? Huh? Absolutely. Felt jilted, don't you think? And so she accuses him of doing the very thing that he refused to do. And what in the world is Joseph going to do? I mean, the man's wife, the Potiphar's wife, gives testimony that he has tried to seduce me, and Joseph could declare his innocence, but it was a pretty one-sided thing. And so with circumstantial evidence, he's thrown into prison. And so we get down there into this 39th chapter, and we see him having been imprisoned. And in this experience of while he was there in prison, we still see the Lord working in Joseph's life in remarkable ways. It's not that long, here we go again. It's not that long before he was placed in a position of leadership and authority over the other prisoners. And among the prisoners was the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, if you remember, of Pharaoh, the chief baker and the chief cupbearer of the Pharaoh. They were there in prison. I don't know what they had done. The Bible doesn't tell us, but sometimes I don't think it took that much for you to get chunked in prison back there in that day and time, especially with someone like a Pharaoh. But each of these two men had a dream, which Joseph was able to interpret, if you remember, and I imagine most of you do remember that. The butler was restored to Pharaoh's favor in 3 days. And what about the baker? Yep, he was to die. Don't you know what kind of response would you have when the interpreter of the dreams tells you that in 3 days this guy's going to be cut loose and he gets his job back and you're going to be hung or executed? My goodness. Well, that's exactly what happened, huh? That is exactly what happened. And when the butler was released, Joseph said, "Now I hope that you will put in a good word for me and intercede for me and try to get me out of this place, because I have tried to help you here with the interpretation of the dream." And the Bible be pretty clear that the butler forgot that about as quick as he got out of prison. He forgot that. So we come down to the 41st chapter, and we see where there's going to be another dream and another interpretation on the part of Joseph. Would you have any comment or question before we get to this 41st chapter? Joseph remained in prison for 2 more years between the time that the butler got out and the time that he remembered and said something to Pharaoh's court about, "I've run across this wonderful interpreter of dreams." 2 years. I say that because the Bible just says it almost like in passing. But I wanted to say to you tonight, to God, I suppose a day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. I truly believe that God is interested in our seconds, let alone our minutes and our hours. He knows about us, to be sure, knows the deepest secrets of our heart. But isn't it interesting that at times there can be a lengthy period in which people have to suffer? You think about Nazi war criminals, and you can think of a lot of examples of where godly people, some that survived, told the story later, but they had to go through a horrible time. Now, if you have an answer as to why that is, I sure wished you would share it with me, because I'm just not that smart. I don't know why the Lord sees fit to allow that kind of thing to happen, but I do have to believe that in His sovereignty and in His wisdom, He expects us to trust Him and to give our difficult situations to Him while we're in the midst of that storm. I suppose it would be wonderful if we had a way of being able to go on past and look back on it like Joseph was able to do. But what was it like? For 2 more years he was there in that prison. And then the Pharaoh himself has 2 dreams which none of his wise men can interpret. And in this connection, the butler remembers Joseph, interpreted his dream and favored him. And at his suggestion, Joseph is called forth. He's summoned and he appears before the Pharaoh. And upon hearing these dreams, Joseph announced the meaning of them. as coming from Jehovah, his God. I think it's important that I point out that the Bible is quite clear that when Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dreams, he made it abundantly clear that the power to do this was not on his own, but was a power that was coming from Jehovah God. He wasn't some kind of a magician that could turn a trick. He was simply a messenger and a tool that God was using to be able to do this powerful thing that most people could not do in interpreting these dreams. Well, he certainly does give Jehovah God the credit. And most of you remember the 7 fat calves and the 7 good ears of grain or corn denoted 7 years of abundant crops, which were to be followed by 7 years of famine, and the lean cows and the poor ears of grain or of corn. I might say I was kind of curious because I never had really. To me, I thought about corn coming from the America and the Indians and Thanksgiving, and it seemed like I remembered history saying that was kind of where we start seeing agriculturists and farmers that were picking up with the corn. So I did go back and do a little reading, and as best I could tell in reading what people that know more about these sort of things than I do said basically that in the Bible many times the word could well be interpreted grain, some kind of consumable grain, and it well may have been corn. Corn did not originate in America. It's been around for a long, long while. Apparently it just wasn't that known in many cultures, but we're talking here, whatever we're talking about, to try to be accurate with the Scripture, we're talking about some type of consumable grain. So that was a part of the dream that Pharaoh could not understand it. And so when he explained to him, going to be 7 good years followed by 7 years of famine, and what I would advise you to do, sir, is that you need to get someone and a group of laborers sufficient to be able to store up supplies in these years of plenty, so that in the years of famine you'll be able to deal and to cope. And I'd recommend that you'd put somebody in charge of doing that very thing. And so the Pharaoh did. And who did he put in charge? Joseph himself, absolutely. I have no idea that Joseph was trying to make a job for himself. I think he was trying to give God's advice to Pharaoh, but Pharaoh responds by giving Joseph this responsibility. And when we get there in chapter 41 to verses 38 through 57, we find that he really does take on the position of being second only to the Pharaoh. And we better shut it down here pretty quick. We'll conclude our study tonight by saying Joseph, surprised by this appointment, but he wasn't just given a position. He was dressed in royal robes and given an Egyptian name, Zeranath-Paneah, which means revealer of secrets. That was the name that the Pharaoh gave to him, revealer of secrets. And he was given a wife, an Egyptian maid by the name of whom? I asked you about Joseph's wife here a few months ago, and some of you came pretty close. You said it started with an A. Asenath, Asenath, I believe. Asenath was the Egyptian woman that was given to Joseph for his wife. And more importantly, maybe than Asenath and her name and being an Egyptian lady, for our study and our memory, we do well to remember that she gave birth to 2 of Joseph's sons, and those sons' names were Ephraim and Manasseh. Yeah, why is that such a big deal? Because it was one of the 12 tribes, was named after Ephraim and Manasseh. And if you'll remember, there's not a tribe named Joseph. but there actually were two tribes that were named from the sons of Joseph, and that is Ephraim and Manasseh. You probably already knew that, but that was one of those things that came out of his marriage to Asenath. Any comment or any word? All right, now listen, I'm depending on y'all kind of keeping me straight. And every once in a while, I'll flat out make a mistake with all full intentions of trying to get the story right. Don't let me get away with that. Brother Wallace, it says right here, so y'all help me and keep me straight on this thing, because there's some folks here that's hearing this practically for the first time, and we want to tell the story the way the Bible tells the story. So y'all help me with that. All right, any other word before we get away tonight? Anything else we need to say to each other as far as announcements or that sort of thing? I might say to you that the Sunday School Task Force with James Humes serving as the chairperson there is in action. They are meeting, have had two meetings, be meeting again tomorrow evening here at the church at 6 o'clock. The folks that are working on the operations manual with Jimmy Addison's chairing that and leading out in that, they also have begun their work, and I feel like that's going to be a manual that's going to be helpful to our church family in the months and the years that are ahead. I don't know if you found it out yet, but if you hadn't, you need to know that the transition team asked Nathan if he would place on our website the final written report that comes from the transition team. And of course, he did that in first-class shape, just like he does most things, and he put that on the website, and it's in that section that is for members only type of thing. And along with that report, and by the way, I think they did an excellent job with that report. I think you're going to be impressed when you see the report from the transition team that really takes it from the time they began their work until such time as they have kind of passed the baton on now to the pastor search committee. But the second document that's also placed online this week comes from the Constitution and Bylaws, and the proposed, that's what it is right now, the proposed Constitution and Bylaws has been completed, taking into consideration conversations that we had with each other on a Zoom meeting, last business meeting, and that has been included now in their recommendations and in that document of our proposed Constitution and Bylaws, and that too has been placed online, and you'll have an opportunity to look that over, and please do, because now if there are any questions about our proposed Constitution and Bylaws, be happy to hear from you, and that would be Melissa and those that are working with her. Ara is a part of that group, and help me, Ara. Teresa, who else is on there? And Hetty, yeah, and any of those folks would, and sir? Yes, I forget. Thank you. But any of those folks can answer your question, I dare say, that you might have. Jim worked hard on that committee, and I'm leaving him out, and was a great contributor to what we did together. So feel free to ask any of the people there that on that Constitution and Bylaws group if you have a question, because come business meeting time on the 16th of September, that Wednesday night, our regular call business meeting, just like our current Constitution calls for us any changes to be made, give a month's notice, and then tell them what it's going to be, and give the church family a month's notice, hear any questions, hear any comments, any suggestions, and then you vote on it without further questions or discussion on a regular business meeting at least 30 days later. So that's what we're doing. That'll be in September, our regular business meeting in September. Did I tell that right, Jim? That's our plan. And so those two documents are online if you didn't know that already, and to take a look. Sunday night, what time? 6 o'clock. At 6 o'clock, we want to feel your pulse. The transition, the pastor search committee is not interested in making you a speech. Be glad to try to keep you up to date on what's going on, but I'm trying to say that's not the night for them to talk. That's Sunday night's the night for you to talk, to hear from you, and I hope you'll come prepared to do that. Any further word before we go? All right, let's stand together, please, and have a word of prayer, and we'll be on our way. Steve Brandon, would you lead us, please, in our benediction tonight?